Would you like to know how to use podcast guesting as the number one strategy to market your book? Would you like to know how to book yourself on the best podcasts out there and also be a fantastic guest? Then this episode of Author Success Show is for you. Hey there, welcome to Author Success Show. In today's episode, we are going to speak to Tom Schwab. Tom is the Chief Evangelist Officer at Interview Valet. You must have heard marketers tell you that the success of your business is just one funnel away. But our guest today has a refreshing new view. Tom asks you to consider that you are just one conversation away. In fact, that's the title of his new book based on his experience and data that he has gathered working with over 700 leading brands as the Chief Evangelist Officer at Interview Valet. So let's hear it from Tom himself. Hi, Tom. Welcome to Author Success Show.
Thank you, Gista. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm just curious to know, Tom, what inspired you to write your first book, Podcast Guest Profits?
Really, it was from people asking me about it. They would ask, how do you grow your business? How do you use podcast guesting to get that exposure? And I got tired of telling people how to do it. And so then I thought, well, I should write a book on it. And I'd been saying that for a long time. And it was actually a friend of mine that encouraged me, Nick Pavlidis, to put a date on it and say it will be done by this time. And he said that doesn't do any good with the ideas in your head. You've got to share them with people.
That's so cool. I learned two things right away. One is when people keep asking you, how did you do it? And when multiple people do it, I think that's a divine signal that you should be writing a book on that topic, which you did. And the second takeaway is that you can have an accountability partner like a friend who actually makes you commit to a particular date for publishing your book.
I promised him in front of my wife that I would not celebrate Christmas until the first draft was done. And so I think it was 2:00 on Christmas Eve, I emailed him the first draft and I said, it's not my best work, but I want to celebrate Christmas. And really the book was out within a couple months after that.
Amazing. So now let's understand, what was your writing process like for your first book? I love asking this to authors, Tom, because everybody has such a unique process, and I'm sure there is something to learn from every author. So how did you go about finishing your manuscript before that Christmas Eve?
So I'm an engineer by degree, and I joke that English is my second language. I don't know if I have a first language. So for me, writing can be a chore. And there was a friend of mine, Pat Flynn, who's a podcaster.
Yes.
And Pat told me how he did his. And since he's put a YouTube video up there that shows how he did it, but he's just started brainstorming and all the ideas that he wanted to have in the book and the common questions and the answers. And then he would take these Post-it notes and get them in some order. And so on the wall behind me, I took all the Post-it notes and said, okay, this is sort of the introduction chapter. And this is, the chapter on podcast outreach. Here's, for the perfect podcast, here's how to repurpose it. So I put those all together, outlined it on my wall, and then started to transcribe it or speak it and then automatically have it transcribed. And that's really where I came up with probably the first draft. And then from there, I edited it and then sent it to someone else to help it read more like a story and less like a how-to manual.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you took this approach, because most authors think that they have to go the traditional way of writing every single day. It works for some people, it doesn't work for most people. And that's why there are more aspiring authors than published authors. So I'm really glad that you knew that speaking is your strength, and that's why you chose to speak your book rather than write it word by word.
But it's interesting because once I wrote the book, my speaking got better also. Because I had thought through the ideas. And I remember a gentleman that runs a great conference every year on social media. And I said, what's it take to be a speaker on your stage? Mm-hmm. And some of the things he said is you've got to have an interesting topic. You've either have to have wrote a book or be a famous celebrity. He said any two of those three. And I'm like, why is that? And he's like, if you're a famous celebrity, you sell tickets. And so that's why we'll have you there. But he says, if not, then you've got to have an interesting subject. And he said, if you have written a book, then I know that you have thought through it. You have thought through all of that in order to really communicate it. And he says, if you can write the book on it, then you can definitely stand on a stage and talk about it. So with that, the book opened up so many doors afterwards.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear that the book has actually helped you not just attract clients for your business, but open so many other opportunities like speaking on stages. So
it has, and it's one of those things where writing the book is half the battle, and then promoting it is the other half.
True. So could you tell us what inspired you now to work on your second book?
It was really, I can't think of his name. Had the book Start With Why. His name escapes me right now. Simon Sinek. And I love that book and that whole philosophy. My first book was more start with how, right? People were saying, how do you do this?
Right.
And so I wanted to answer that question. But to me, that question is meaningless, or that answer is meaningless, unless you ask the one before that. And that's, why would you do podcast guesting? Why would you go on other people's audiences? And once people understand that, the why you do it, then the how makes a lot more sense. I think too often in this digital age, everybody, I'll say myself, is focused on the tactics, right? How do I do this? How do I do this? Well, asking the question, why should I do it? Not how do I write a book, but why should I write a book? What am I trying to accomplish? That starting with the end in mind is so important. So this second book is more the manifesto. It's the precursor to the first book.
Right. It's more the mindset stuff. The skill sets can be later on figured out, but the mindset is more important.
Yes.
Right. So it's interestingly titled One Conversation Away. I love the title, by the way. It's it has a nice hook to it. So what's the main idea behind this? Why just one conversation away? Because people end up having so many conversations with so many people. So how did this idea of just this one conversation come about?
It really came as a backlash or a pushback to a marketing term that I kept hearing, that you're just one funnel away. Right? You're just one funnel away. And while that is great marketing and they've built a great company around it, I looked at everything great in my life has come through a conversation. Great friends that I've met, great clients that I've met, great partners that I've met, my bride, right? She did not come through a funnel and a Facebook campaign, right? It was a conversation. And one of the things that I realize is that the best gift you can ever give someone is introducing them to a new idea or new person. And conversations can change the world. I know they've changed my world and they've changed other people's world. So I think we need to have more authentic conversations. And, it used to be a compliment if you told somebody, you are a great conversationalist. Now that's sort of unheard of. Instead, people are talking about, well, I put this video out and it got, it went viral. It had 100 million views, or, I put this post out and, it got 1,000 likes. Well, that's not a conversation, right? There's no meaningful exchange there. And that's one of the things I love about podcast is the longer form allows people to have conversations and go deeper in ideas. And so that's my big thing is, if you want to say starting with why, start with the conversation. Who do you want to talk with? What do you want to talk about? How can we have a real conversation and talk about things that matter as opposed to just adding to the noise?
Yeah, that's so true. The one thing that I must appreciate you, Tom, you've been on hundreds of podcasts, right, already. And you don't have to keep doing this again and again. But here you have your upcoming book, and you look at this as another opportunity to build new relationships, make new connections, speak to other people's audience, and also promote the book. So when somebody who is already having so much visibility is doing this, I personally think that every first-time author should really look at podcast guesting as a very important strategy in their book marketing. So, what's your advice to first-time authors, especially when it comes to marketing their book?
Well, I would say it's the responsibility to market the book, right? Because what was your purpose of writing the book? To share what you know, to help people. I would say most authors realize there's an altruistic point to it, right? Maybe they're trying to build a business, build their brand, but they're probably not going to get rich off of their first book. So your goal was to impact people. Well, just writing it doesn't help anybody, right? It's like obscurity is our biggest problem, right? There's right now thousands, tens of thousands of people that your book could really help. The problem is that, they don't know it exists. And Amazon's not going to help you. It's just going to get lost in the title or lost in the search. Even if you go with a traditional publisher, they're not going to spend that much time and money promoting your book. If you believe in the ideas, you have to do that. So I would go back and say, how can you promote your book? And start with that why question, or why and then the how. And for some people, if they like writing, well, maybe they can write guest blogs and get it out there. I believe that people really want to know the heart of the author. What's the why behind it? They resonate with that. And I think that's especially true for nonfiction. And so you've got to find a way to connect with people. And in the old days, that used to be, traveling from city to city. So you could go to a Barnes and Noble and read from your book and sign it, right? That I don't think that worked pre-COVID. It definitely doesn't work now. So you got to decide what other ways you can do that. Some people are very, very comfortable on video. Other people are still self-conscious about that. And though podcasting might be easier for them. I think through our experience with Zoom and online meetings over the last couple of years, most people have gotten to be more comfortable talking on Zoom, right? So, and I really think the term podcast interview, that's almost a misnomer, right? This is not a journalist asking me 10 questions and number 4 is a gotcha, right? This is a conversation, and we're all used to having conversations. So I think that's the responsibility of every author, is to figure out how to have those conversations that can get people to learn about your book, talk about the book, recommend it to other people so that you can help them.
Yeah, very well said, Tom. I have faced this problem whenever I talk to author clients, because they feel that, hey, I have done my job of writing the book, but I'm really horrible at marketing. And they just feel that it's not their responsibility. I think responsibility is the right word that you mentioned, because I feel that it's just a slight mindset shift that an author needs to have. They feel, very shy, and they are very modest in saying that I don't want to market myself, but they're actually not marketing them. They're marketing their idea and the book, which can help people. So it's not about doing something for your own self-marketing, but you're actually helping spread the idea by talking to more people.
That's a great way to look at it, that you're marketing the idea. And because that's what you did when you wrote the book, you marketed that idea. And now you've got to promote that idea too. And I think the other thing is words have meaning. And often people take sales or marketing and there's a negative connotation to it, right? I don't want to be a self-marketer. I don't want to be like the Kardashians. I don't want to be like somebody that's out there hawking their book. But I think there's a benefit in promoting those ideas. And I think the best tweet that I have ever seen on the internet came from Rand Fishkin. Rand wrote a book called Inside Startup Founder Uncovered, I believe it was. And he talks about software as a service there. He started a company called SEO Moz. And he said, the best way to sell something today online is not to sell anything, but to earn the awareness, respect, and trust of those people who might buy. Right. So when people say marketing or sales, I don't want to go out there and have to sell my book. Well, nobody wants to be sold a book. right?
Right.
Everybody wants to solve their problem. And if you can talk about how you can solve their problem, you don't have to worry about selling it. They'll buy it.
Sure, very well said. There are other platforms, as you mentioned, like blogs and videos. So, how is podcasting superior or better than these other ways of putting out content?
It's interesting. I think podcasting is starting to merge together, right? So we're doing this podcast interview. Well, you're also capturing the video. So if that goes up on Facebook, is that still a podcast? Well, what if you put it up on YouTube? YouTube is one of the fastest growing search engines for podcasts right now. And people will say, well, that's not a podcast then. Well, how about Sirius XM just bought some podcast networks? What if this is up on Sirius XM and it's on satellite radio? What if somebody takes the transcript, makes an article or a blog out of it? Is that still a podcast? I think that term podcast, it's changing so much right now. Yeah. So I think really what it is how can you create in a way that's easiest for you and then repurpose in a way that's easiest for other people? So for me, I live in Southwest Michigan, right? Traveling for me is tougher. And traveling just, in this day and age is tougher with all the restrictions and complications there. So you look and say, what could I do no matter how the world is, right? Well, look at the avenues there. The other thing is that I do a lot of keynote speeches, but they're a lot of work, right? To stand up there for 45 minutes and just have it the entire Tom show, that can be tough, but a conversation is so much easier. So I always encourage people, find the way that's easiest for you to create and then repurpose it, right? There's some podcasts out there that are nothing but a voice actor, a voice talent that is reading a blog. You can do it that way, right? And a lot of people will come back and say, well, I hate the way my voice sounds. Well, do you know, everybody hates the way the voice sounds.
Exactly.
You can talk to people that are like news anchors. And if you'd ask them, they're like, oh yeah, I hate the way my voice sounds. But you know what? We need to get over it. If you really hate the way your voice sounds, then for God's sake, never say another word, right? Become a hermit or something. But if not, you don't have to listen to it, right? You should listen to your podcast to get better, but the rest of the world has to listen to your voice. And so from that, I think even if you're an introvert, podcasting and especially podcast guesting can be a great way to start getting more comfortable with this. I started with podcast guesting and then I did more public speaking, got more comfortable on video. And I don't know if I've got any better, but I just got more comfortable.
Yeah, I think with time and with practice, people just keep getting better. And your first interview may suck, but that's okay. It will still be valuable for some people who are listening to it.
It's like the first thing you ever wrote. You were proud of it, but I don't think that the story that you wrote in second grade, that's what you're still promoting, right? You're promoting your newest work that you're most proud of.
Yeah, so true. And you also mentioned about going on other people's podcast is easier than having your own show. So how does one get started with this? Because there are so many shows out there. There are like millions of podcasts right now. So when an author decides to publish their book, how should they start planning this whole journey of going on different people's shows?
And that is the great question. How do you plan it? And we typically tell authors start about 4 months before the book launches, because there's that lead time there. The book may not even be, in its final printing. We've had people that, they know what's in the book. They've got a draft cover and they'll go out and start promoting it there, because the best podcasts, they're almost like doctors' offices and restaurants. If there's not a waiting list, there's a reason, and a reason you don't want to be there. And you mentioned there's right now, we're here at the end of 2021, there's 2.5 million podcasts out there, but there's a little asterisk. There's less than 500,000 that have actually published an episode in the last 30 days. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the right audience. So with that, I always tell people it's all about focus, right? You don't need to be on Oprah's podcast or Brene Brown's podcast, right? Those could come later, but start with smaller ones. You think of Broadway shows, right? They don't start on Broadway. They go other places to refine the message, to practice, to get all that. So I would just start with a list of, 10 shows that you think would be ideal for you, where you could add value, where your ideal audience would be. Then I always tell people this is the secret, and it's not secret, it's common sense. Now you tell me if I'm wrong. There's 3 types of people that all podcast hosts want to have on their as a guest. They're friends of friends, and people they want to be friends. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right. So nowhere in there does it say a cold, creepy pitch. And so I often tell people, you can buy lists of podcasters right now. I am on that list. I don't have a podcast. I get probably 4 pitches a day that says, Tom, I love your podcast and would like to be a guest. Well, clearly you've never listened to my podcast because it doesn't exist. So you think about that. Friends of friends, and people you want to be their friends. So if you know them, that's an easy ask. Look in LinkedIn, look in your connection, see if there's a common link where somebody could introduce you. Then finally, people they want to be their friends, right? Build a relationship first. Listen to the podcast, leave a rating and review. Podcast hosts will recognize that, right? We're all vain. We listen for our own names. Follow it. Follow the social media. Comment on it, social media, share something on their social media. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, what is it? Jab, 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 right hook.
Right.
Well, I look at it as give, ask, right? So, give them a rating and review, give them a like, give them a share, give them an email that says, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about jab, 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 right hook. I look at it as give, ask, give a review, give a like, reshare theirs, and then give them a reason to invite you. So reach out and say, I would, I think I could add value to your audience with this and these ideas. And if you do that, they'll be asking you to be on the show. And people will say, well, that's not scalable, but like conversations, you can either spam the entire world or have a meaningful conversation. And, if you buy a list and email everybody, yeah, you'll probably get some invitations, but there'll be invitations to podcasts you didn't want to be on in the first place. And the great thing about podcast interviews is at the end of an interview, if you do a good job, just ask the host, hey, do you know any other podcaster that you think I would bring value to? Because podcasters know podcasters. So if you do a good job and they introduce you to 2 friends and they introduce you to 2 friends, and so on, all of a sudden your dance card will get filled up quickly.
That's real good advice. It's all about being very intentional about the kind of shows you want to be. Either reach out to friends who are already podcasters, or see if they can refer their friends, or just build new friendships by genuinely adding value to them by leaving reviews and things like that, and then do your asking. So yeah, this sounds good. So let's assume that an author has already been booked on a dozen shows, and now they're going to be appearing on their first recording. What are some best practices an author should keep in mind to be a great guest?
Well, and I think this goes back to the word guest, and there's something that we have forgotten about being a guest, right? So if you invited me to speak on your physical stage, I would know who the audience was. I would show up on time. I would show up prepared. I would be a gracious guest. Think about if you invited me over to dinner, right? And said, Tom, I want to introduce you to a dozen of my dearest friends. Well, you're going to figure out what's the wardrobe for it? What time is it? You're going to RSVP beforehand. You're going to touch base with them a day before. You're not going to show up 10 minutes late for dinner. And I think somehow with podcasts now, and especially over Zoom, people forget that you are a guest, right? You get access to thousands of people. So act like a gracious guest. I always tell people, your job on a podcast is to make the host look like a genius
Mm.
for introducing you. Because if you do that, if you add so much value, you don't have to sell yourself. They'll sell you better than you ever could.
Right. I think a lot of good practices that we naturally have in the offline world, if we don't forget to bring it to the online world, it's just going to make life easy.
Mm-hmm. And little things like if you want to be seen as a professional, make sure that you sound and look like a professional. So have a professional microphone, and you can get them online for under $100. Have a decent video camera, even if it's off of a newer laptop. It'll work good. Make sure the lighting looks good. Make sure your background is consistent and consistent with your brand. I can think of was one podcast interview that I remember watching, and the person had a window behind them in their office, and I don't know if somebody got hit in the parking lot or something, but there was all that commotion in there. So make sure that you can control whatever you can, because this interview started to go viral, not because of what the person was saying, but what was going on in the background.
Right. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you, Tom, is you speak to so many people, right? You have so many of these conversations. A couple of years later, how do you still manage to maintain the relationship with all these podcast hosts that you've spoken with? So do you have a system to manage this, or how do you really maintain those relationships?
Well, I've got an advantage. So I run a company. I founded a company that reaches out to the podcast host. So it's not that we're just reaching out one time. We build that relationship, know what they like, and introduce them to great guests. But as a guest, I highly recommend people keep that conversation going. If you thought the host was influential enough with their audience, why wouldn't you want a relationship there? And so there's some little unscalable things I do. I'll send them a note afterwards, just a quick thank you note. Remember, snail mail, it still works. Thank you for having me on the show. Also, promote the show when it comes out there. And remember, just because it came out, the 1st of February doesn't mean it's dated by the 1st of March. I'll put them in a rotation and keep putting them out there. The other thing is to reference it. What's the old joke of how do you sell newspapers in a small town? You put everybody's name in it, because that way they'll buy a copy and their mom will buy 5. Right. So it's the same way when I'm promoting a podcast interview. I'm not just promoting it with myself. I'll put the host name in there, because then they'll see, wow, Tom really enjoyed this interview. He valued it. You get access to my audience. I get access to your audience. And then also, I really believe, relationships are the ultimate currency. So we go to all of the podcast meetings. Right. It's not just an email. So chances are, if you go to any of the podcast meetings in the future, who knows, we may meet in real life.
Yeah, so true. So, Tom, what would be your final word of advice for authors who are just about to publish their book? As an author or as a podcaster, whatever you want to tell people.
I'll do this as an author, a podcaster, or as a human being. If you're any of those 3, this applies to you. And it's the fact that what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And I noticed this early on when I was in the military. I ran nuclear power plants on an aircraft carrier. And afterwards, people would always say, wow, did you like watch the planes take off and land? And that was a joke there, because you could always tell somebody that was new. They would climb up all the different levels. And there was a place called Vulture's Row. And you'd watch it for about 2 days, and then you just realize this is ordinary. I'm not walking all the way up there. But everybody else thought that was amazing. And it's the same thing in your life, right? If nobody has ever published a book, they look at an author and go, that's amazing. How did you do that? See, we all overvalue what other people know and undervalue what we know. Right. Now, in the old days, I used to be able to say, well, I don't have to share what I know, because I live in Southwest Michigan, right? Who am I going to share it with? But now with the internet, right, what you know could help so many people. And you've already decided that, hey, I'm going to share what I know in a book. Well, don't leave it there. Find other ways to share that. Find other ways to promote your book, because when you decided to write that book, it was to help people, to change people's lives, and that's not done when the book is finished. You still have to keep promoting that. So I would encourage you, share what you know, and hopefully I will hear you on a podcast.
Wow, that's such a powerful message. I'm going to write this down somewhere on my wall in front of me, because I tend to discount my greatness all the time, and I'm sure everybody does it. So thanks for this, reminder that we should all set for ourselves. So, Tom, tell us, where can our listeners and viewers find out more about you, more about Interview Valet and everything?
Yeah, so just go to interviewvalet.com/HSP. And I'll make a page just for the audience here. There's a few things. First of all, I'm not here to sell my book, right? I give away my book. I just want the ideas to get out there. So if you go there, if you're in the US, you can get a physical book. If you're outside the US, I'll send you a digital book. There's also a webinar or training that I did on how to do a podcast book tour. I'll put that there. And then finally, if you're like, wow, I'd like to talk with Tom or his team about how they could help me get out there on a podcast book tour to get in front of my ideal audience there, please just come back to interviewvalet.com/HSP, and I'll put it all there.
Great. Thank you so much for all the value you've provided in the show, Tom. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.